Chinese President Xi Jinping is meeting with Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi for a two-day informal meeting starting Friday in China's central city, Wuhan. While the leaders of the world's two largest emerging markets are talking about bilateral and international issues with the intention of building mutual trust and resolving differences. What key topics will the two capture the leaders' attention? And against the backdrop of economic nationalism and trade protectionism on the rise, how can the two countries cooperate more closely? Welcome to today's special discussions on CGTN, co-produced and co-broadcast by CGTN and NDTV. And actually, let me introduce my co-host, Vishnu Sam, who is right now in Wuhan, where the talk is happening. Hello, Vishnu.
Well, so thank you very much for introducing me, and thank you very much for having me for the second time. CGTN and NDTV have been collaborating together, and this occasion, I can tell you, is very, very special. India and China looking for a reset in the equations, which have seen a testy equation over the last 1 year or so. And over here in Wuhan, the Chinese President Xi Jinping and Prime Minister Narendra Modi getting into an informal summit to try and overcome some of these differences by looking at the broader macro picture, perhaps an important first step towards eventually resolving some of the key issues that exist between our two countries.
Yes, indeed. As Vishnu, you just mentioned, broader picture is important because last year there has some disputes, the border disputes between China and India. Actually, it's not between India and China, but Bhutan. But they have drawn us into some kind of a tension for a year. But finally, the two sides come around and realize the bigger picture is that the two countries can and should work together. Vishnu?
Oh, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. You are referring to the Doklam standoff, and it was and remains an unfortunate chapter in our history. But I think there's a great deal of pragmatism on the side of both India and China in trying to go beyond that, to try and go beyond some of the other differences which exist, not to brush them aside, but to perhaps recognize that in order to resolve those problems, we need to be looking at the equation from a larger strategic standpoint. And therefore, if there is an element of trust that elevates between our leaders, the Chinese President Xi Jinping and Prime Minister Narendra Modi, then perhaps eventually some of these outstanding issues can be resolved. So it's a leap of faith, I would say, for both India and China, for the leaders of both our countries to come over here to Wuhan and to talk in an open format. It's unstructured, it's informal, and to take the process forward.
Yes, indeed. And the talks are taking place in Wuhan, in informal talks, but those two leaders are very pragmatic and visionary. That's why this kind of thing can happen in the first place. For more discussions, I'm joined from New Delhi by Ashok Mehta, former Major General of the Indian Army, General Mehta, and here in the studio, You Dongxiao, Associate Professor at National Defense University. Before we start the discussion, let's first take a look at the schedule of the two leaders meeting in Wuhan. Looking at the schedule for the 2 days, there are some meetings, informal meetings, and also visits for both leaders. And Vishnu, what is your reading of the schedule, and why the two leaders are scheduled to visit some places that are not so formal? For example, the Hubei Provincial Museum on the first day of their meeting. I was from Wuhan, actually, and that museum obviously is a very important one, but start on a cultural note, that's something interesting. All right, let me ask the first question to General Mehta. General Mehta, what do you make of the informal setting that is created for the leaders meeting in central China's Wuhan city? What do you think this is for both countries?
I think this is a very innovative way of building trust and personal chemistry between the top leaders of the country. Do remember that President Xi Jinping is almost president for life, at least for the next 10 years or 20 years. but this political system in India ensures that Prime Minister Narendra Modi will have to fight another election. So for him, this is a bit of a political risk, in as much as Rahul Gandhi, who is the leader of the Congress party, has already tweeted to him, do remember the border question, do remember Doklam, and we are with you, wish you good luck. So that's the leader of the opposition telling Narendra Modi this. But to that question about the system, this new system, I think a lot of hard work has gone in, a lot of preparation has gone in. Although they call it informal, I think there is some structured delegation level talks that have already taken place according to an MEA release.
General Mehta, do you think President Xi and Modi have personal chemistry that work in their interests? And if there was election in India next year, will that make Modi a better, more motivation to work a finer relationship with China?
Well, by all reckoning, Prime Minister Modi should be there till 2024. That's another 6 years. And Prime Minister Modi is a very popular leader. You have a strong, popular leader who vibes with the people of India. And similarly in China. In China, you now have a leader who is, if not stronger than Mao, as strong as Mao himself. He has invested in him through the National Party Congress and the Communist Party tremendous powers. When you have two strong leaders with powers and the people behind them, it is possible, after you have built trust and sincerity and the personal chemistry, that some of these intractable questions, like the border question, or other difficult questions that bedevil the relations, like Doklam. For example, the question of Bhutan. These questions can be resolved much more conveniently and reasonably and much faster than if the two leaders did not enjoy that personal chemistry, that confidence in each other. And I think this informal meeting, also accompanied by delegation level talks, is a very innovative way.
All right, I just, General Mehta, if I can interrupt you for a moment, so that
Vishnu.
Yeah.
At this moment, we are trying to break the ice.
Yeah, I just wanted to, General Mehta, we've got plenty of time to actually address some of these issues, but I wanted to also just mention and reflect on what General Mehta said, the structured or the unstructured nature of talks. I would like to tell our viewers that yes, today there were 2 rounds of talks which were structured. There were delegates from either side, but tomorrow it's just going to be one-on-one meetings, and there's going to be a boat ride. The 2 leaders will be on a boat. They'll be walking on the banks of a lake as well to try and improve that personal rapport that they already have. I'd like to go across to Yu Dongxiao, the Associate Professor at the National Defense University in Beijing. Thanks, sir, very much for being with us. Do you believe that some of the negativity that we've seen in India-China relations over the last 1 year will be overcome by the end of this visit?
Thank you for your question. Actually, the most important lessons we can learn from the last year Donglang incident is, as you mentioned, a very unhappy chapter in our bilateral relations, is that we should be more realistic about our bilateral relations. So on one hand, we should realize there are many differences or even disputes between our 2 countries. And we should find a peaceful and realistic solution which acceptable to both parties. But on the other side, we should realize that territorial disputes or the differences are not whole story of about bilateral relations. They are only part of our bilateral relations. Where our two leaders, they are very wise to study or to push forward our bilateral relations from higher and broader perspective, and realize that China, India are great nations, both of oldest civilization in the world, the most populous country in the world, and also China is the second largest economy, and India also ranks 6 or 7 according to different statistics. Anyhow, one of the largest economy in the world. So our two countries have 2.6 billion people, such huge market. So there's great potential for our two countries to promote our bilateral relations.
And Mr. Yo, I want to follow up on that, because border disputes is not an easy issue to resolve in a short period of time. Do you think Prime Minister Modi will probably pay more attention to trade issues, because obviously there's a trade deficit between the two major economies in Asia? And what is the way of addressing that issue?
I think that, just as I mentioned, we should be more realistic about our bilateral relations. Territorial disputes or border issues are most sensitive issue for both our two countries. They are not easy to be resolved. So I think two leaders will definitely talk about this, address this issue. But it is impossible, I think, for one talk to overthrow these issues or solve the problems. But we should look forward, remain these differences for the time being. We can find one day we can find a more realistic and possible solution which is acceptable to both parties. But I think the most important issue for us is that we are facing unprecedented changes in today's world. We have many common interests in promote the global trade and economic development of our two countries. We have many platforms to do so. For example, BRICS. For example, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. So we have many new platforms for us to promote both bilateral and multilateral cooperation.
Let me ask General Mehta.
I just wanted to come in at this stage.
Okay. Vishnu?
I just wanted to come in over here before we go back to General Mehta and just introduce you to a couple of people who they're Indian nationals, 4 of them over here who live over here in China. They study in Wuhan. And I'm also joined by Yuli. He's been an investment banker who's lived in Bangalore in the past as well. You know, Yuli, just over the last one day, it's been so encouraging, so interesting to see so many people from the area with a genuine sense of curiosity about this visit. What are you hearing? What are people telling you?
Definitely anticipation is actually building. You can see the excitement and it's infectious. Basically, you can see the Bollywood taking Chinese, the Wuhan's box office by storm. And Wuhan as a central city in China is on the rejuvenation path. You cannot find a better, a more auspicious and serendipitous, spectacular combination of the two. So I think it's unprecedented, and the Wuhan people have no expectation of it. So you can say anything, but I would just say it's pretty much, you know, it's beyond our widest dream that such the event of import could happen here.
Srishti, you are a student. Are you a medical student here?
Yes, sir.
And you must be pretty excited about Prime Minister Modi coming over here. There are lots of students. How many students are there in Wuhan in your institute?
Approximately about like 450 students are there from India in our university, and we were very eagerly waiting for the Prime Minister's visit because it's in like after so many years, and we get to see the Prime Minister just opposite to our uni. That's a very big thing for all the Indian students. So yesterday night we were eagerly waiting outside the hotel, and we were cheering for him, and we were very surprised and we were very happy that he specially came out and waved at us for like 5 minutes, and that just made our day. That moment can just never get out of our head, definitely. Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about your experience in China. How is it a friendly place for you to study?
China is like the conditions in China is much different from than there is in India. It is far better. The weathers here, the people here, they are much friendly. They be with us. They talk to us. They be friendly with us. We actually play with them together.
Right.
It's nothing like what.
Safe, friendly environment. I wish that safe, friendly environment was also real as far as our equations were concerned. But perhaps after the visit of Prime Minister Modi and this summit, things will change. So it's back to you in case you wanted to ask General Mehta. I interrupted you with a question. Go ahead.
I'm so glad to hear that those Indian students are having a good time in Wuhan and saying the people there are friendly. About the friendliness between the nations, I want to ask General Mehta. It seems that both President Xi and Prime Minister Modi share the same vision about how to build their own economy and global economy. They have been talking at Davos Forum, Prime Minister Modi this year and President Xi last year. Let's first take a listen in of what they said at Davos. Can we have a run of the Davos speech from President Xi and Prime Minister Modi?
Pursuing protectionism is just like locking oneself in a dark room. While wind and rain may be kept outside, so are light and air. No one will emerge as a winner in a trade war.
Bilateral and multilateral trade agreements and negotiations have come to a kind of standstill. The solution to this worrisome situation against globalization is not isolation. It's in understanding and accepting change and in formulating agile and flexible policies in line with the changing times.
So, General Mehta, both President Xi and Prime Minister Modi have been championing globalization. Xi suggested that China and India should become partners for development and partners for growth. What do you think of their visions, especially in the context that the advanced economies are now talking about setting up barriers for trade and hiking tariffs for imports from developing countries?
Well, before Prime Minister Modi left, he had tweeted that he would share with President Xi Jinping India's vision and priorities for national development. And one of the key issues in that is trade and having investment and development, a prosperous country. And this question today of globalization and trade wars that are about to begin, especially between your country and the United States of America, you see a great amount of overlap in the multilateral fora between India and China, whether it is WTO, whether it is climate change, whether it is free trade. So there are these many areas of convergence between the two largest and fastest growing, or at least two fastest growing economies, one second largest and one third or the fourth largest economies. And cooperation between these two countries, both at the multilateral fora and at the regional level, will benefit the regional countries. You know, we've talked about what will happen in the international and bilateral. Between the international and bilateral, there is the region. And today, in this region, there is no place where China's footprint in South Asia, where China's footprint
My question,
isn't there.
General Mehta,
For example,
is why can't the convergence between the two major economies, China and India, be much more wider? Because in 2017, the trade only reached $84 billion, although that's an increase of more than 20%. But considering the population of both China and India, it should be even higher.
Yeah, it should be, but you know the trade deficit out of the 80 billion, I think the trade deficit is about 50 billion. And last week, your trade minister was here in India, which is a very good sign, and they are trying to work out practical ways in not only increasing the level of trade, but to reduce the trade deficit as far as India is concerned.
But what can be done
exactly
to decrease the deficit and increase the volume of trade?
Sorry, I didn't get that.
What do you think needs to happen to narrow the gap of trade volume and of course, the traffic of goods and services between the two major economies? Obviously, there is something in place.
Well, some of the products that have do not have access, pharmaceuticals, for example, those should be allowed to get in. And I think there should be much larger investment. India is the market, and the Chinese, if there is a larger even larger than what it is today, if there is real investment, the trade volumes are bound to increase. And if trade volumes are going to increase,
and I think that's something that both countries would want very closely, General Mehta. But we need to just quickly move on to another key issue over here, and I wanted to go across to Mr. Yu Dongqiao about that. Sir, one of the points mentioned by Prime Minister Modi is that India and China need to come together to work more to fight terrorism at an international level. Now, India faces concerns about terrorism coming from Pakistan. Pakistan is an ally of China, but in the recent past, we've also seen Chinese nationals being targeted in Pakistan. So what role do you believe India and China can have in fighting terrorism?
I think that China is very clear in its position that China opposes terrorism in any form and anywhere, no matter in China, in India, in Pakistan, in US, anywhere. And China and India have many common interests in fighting terrorism. We know that in today's world, there's a very important problem that what is terrorism? Who are terrorists? Maybe there are some different interpretations. Terrorism for one is a free fighter for another. So anyhow, I think that China and India...
No, I don't think so, sir. I think terrorism is universally defined as an act of violence. I don't think there is any two interpretations of terrorism, sir.
But as you know, that different countries have, for example, some organization is regarded as a terrorist organization, but either in other countries, they are not the terrorist organization. Even they are regarded as free fighters. In many
a good example is that Israelis and Palestinians think of Hamas different.
There are Pakistani terrorist organizations which are operating in India, in Jammu and Kashmir, and those are terrorist organizations. They kill people. I think your reference was to that, and I think India would expect China's help in fighting that sort of terror.
Okay, I understand. And we think that Pakistan is also a victim of terrorism, just like India and China. China, you mentioned, for example, some terrorist organizations in Xinjiang, in China, autonomous region, but in some Western countries, they are not regarded as terrorists. So that's why just I say there's some difference, different interpretation or different understanding. But I think that, just as you mentioned, we should formally oppose any violent terrorist attack against the civilians, innocent people, no matter for what purpose they are wrong. So China, India, we have many common interests in this regard. And to my knowledge, Chinese military and India military have a joint training program and to fight terrorism. So I think we can put forward this program even together with Pakistan. And we think that Pakistan also the victim of terrorism. They make great efforts.
I think that's why the two leaders need to sit down and iron out all those differences on different issues. But some analysts are comparing this meeting as historic. I believe that Vishnu must have some thinking on how important is this meeting in Wuhan for both countries. Vishnu?
Well, you said it. It is historic. And I think it's wonderful that despite the differences that exist, some of which were reflected on this program, there is a sense that, look, we need to make a historic change and we need to overcome these differences. Imagine in Asia, India and China not being the best of friends at every single level. It's not going to be an easy process because, let's face it, the differences are substantial. But whatever the differences are, if the process of talking doesn't begin now, then in the future, these will perhaps not be resolved. I think it's also very encouraging that Prime Minister Modi has invited President Xi for another round of informal talks. We believe that will be in India next year once it's finalized. But this process of informal talks at the very highest level gives a political heft to the process between India and China, which obviously needs to improve.
Yes, indeed. And some even compare this meeting to the historic head-to-head of Deng Xiaoping and Rajiv Gandhi in 1988. And some say it might reset the bilateral ties. Or maybe, but China and India are not agreeing a lot of things, possibly more so than 30 years ago when China and India were economically on par. We probably should keep our hopes moderate and our work full steam. However, whatever comes out of this meeting will lay the groundwork for the SCO summit in June and probably set the tone for the future of both China and India. China will play host to the summit in coastal Qingdao, where both India and Pakistan will be by the size of China in an international setting. So will China drive home the message that China-Pakistan economic corridor can be a wide access for all, but not a shortcut for few? Well, maybe we'll have a clearer answer very soon. Thank you very much, Vishnu. I enjoyed it very much. Thank you.